Hey everybody, and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program RP-0. We are once again joining our crew out here at Mars with engineer Laura Douglas. Has a lot of things to do. If you're wondering why the rover is over here flipped on its side, it's because when I loaded into this scenario, the rover and the base bounced. The rover took out the solar panel on the base that you now see happily deployed, and then flipped itself over and ended up here. Feeling that this was quite unfair, I went back and changed the save file, but I was kind of unable to figure out which solar panel I needed to reset. So I just reset a bunch of them, and I'm on the honor system to either re-break or just not use the other fixed solar panels. As you can see, there's still only one there on the base. There was this one here on the tail of the rover that we'll get rid of at some point. I'm not exactly sure how we got rid of it, or magically. And you'll also see the, ouch, that probably hurt a little bit. These antennas, very, very powerful. Excellent jack stands. Anyway, there's one more on the ascent stage that we need to close up and dispose of because it was broken during the landing phase. Anyway, since we have successfully landed a resupply pod and some magic force insists on flipping the rover over, I'm pretty sure that that one had to do with the landing leg. I'm really no clue how, but it has magic physics that just do weird things sometimes, and yeah, I'm not exactly excited about this, but we will once again leave this command seat, jump down, and flip this rover right side up, but only after we can just go ahead and get rid of this dumb thing. And off it goes to explore the sands of Mars all by itself. So we will once again go to our antenna rover writing system. It'll work eventually, I promise. It's just a matter of getting the antenna plopped down in the correct space and opening it and letting this thing bounce over. We've done this a few times before, but we're going to make some changes to this rover, load it up with what scientific equipment we do have, get rid of some of the miscellaneous, extraneous stuff that we don't need, and we're going to go collect our Astros 2 engine from our drop pod. Food missile that lacks food? Yeah. Service deployment system? I don't know what exactly we should call it now, but this has been a particularly arduous set of getting this thing upright, and somebody forgot to set the parking brake. Yeah, and it completely outruns her. Thankfully, we can still do local control. Just drive it back. We just can't set the brakes because we don't have a connection, and then eventually we'll switch the correct thing and board. Fantastic. And for some reason, the front wheels do not like steering to their full actuation. I actually tried locking the steering on the rear wheels. That didn't do us a lot of good either, because the front wheels are just not articulating fully. But now that we are out here at the ascent stage, we're going to pull a couple of things off. This is as a just in case. We can't get this engine back to the ascent stage or install it correctly. There's still a lot of ifs in this. Just because we got one on the ground doesn't mean it's going to work. And the number one thing that we can absolutely get rid of is that docking port, because we're not going to keep this ascent stage around for any reason whatsoever. It doesn't really need to dock. We just need to get close and then EVA across, and the weight savings would do us quite a bit of good, both for fuel efficiency and liftoff TWR. If you remember this thing, we could probably use some fuel to dump into it. If we had any fuel to dump into it at all, we would do that, but it's at a less than 1 TWR. It's like 0.98 or something, and we do absolutely need this extra little bit of life support because the base of this ascent stage that got knocked off during our landing was our life support stuff. There's some in each of those lander cans, but I think they'll only support the crew for just a day, maybe two, and that's not nearly enough. So we will need to keep this life support container. However, we will also need it to finish this drive. It's 100 plus kilometers or so to go pick up our new engine. And I was not sure that the life support contained just within the spacesuit would be sufficient to get our crew person out there and collect said engine. So for the time being, we're going to take that little tank with us. We're actually going to reattach it to the base itself when we get back, top it off, and then reattach it to our ascent stage. We'll be doing some work with that later. We do have a lot of work that we could be doing down here. Our unfortunate landing site is at the base of Tharsis, a volcano, which would be a super interesting thing to gather some science from. Were it its own biome, it's just listed as highlands here, unfortunately, but I still think it would be totally worth getting a sample from maybe inside the volcano, or maybe the crust around the volcano. Something from the highlands, definitely. If we can manage to bring back 2 samples, because we have 2 crew pods going up, we can totally sneak more than 1 sample from a single biome in there. So anyway, we have dropped off our docking port, our thruster assembly thing, and our command chair, just in case we need that for something. Oh yeah, that's what I did with that solar panel. All right, we're gonna try to put that in storage so that we're not using it. The solar particle collector thingy needs to be in a vacuum. We've got the rest of our experiments and a very nice screenshot now that we've kind of set things back to normal. I'm going to make some adjustments to the traction control settings here on our rover wheels, and now we can jump out to the map view and start to plot our course. We do not want to go straight across, but it's basically 180 degrees across the volcano from us. So we're going to just kind of walk around the side where it's a little shallower, and then plot our course in and let MechJeb's automated rover guidance fail miserably at first, but you know, it helps when you tell it to follow and then hit the speed limiter and just let it do its thing. So I had really hoped that this would be a nice simple drive. Of course, no automated rover adventure is ever as simple as it seems, especially when you're getting your steering from the back wheels, which is highly unstable. This is not a forklift. This is a rover. We should probably have front wheel articulation a little bit more than just a few degrees, but they are kind of blocked, I guess is what they're telling me. And the weight distribution of this rover is poor, to say the least. And the traction settings are a little bitey, so when we kind of take a bounce off the terrain a little bit, it usually ends up with us spinning a lot. It's very unsettling. And then this. A small bump causes us to nose down and just grind across the surface until we finally come to a rest. The torque settings, not really doing much, but here you can very clearly see how much the rear wheels articulate in steering versus the front wheels, and that's not okay. That's not how this thing should be operating. Something has obviously gotten a little screwy, but the first problem to solve is to get this thing upright again. So we'll move our antenna jacks into place and then fail just a few times trying to set this thing upright before getting the antenna into a more proper situation. Boom, there it is, upright. So while we're here, I think we're going to make some changes, both to help the weight balance of this poor rover and make the wheels that do the steering actually be the ones that can steer. So first we're going to relocate some of our sciencey bits to things that are probably not going to get obstructed later on by various constructions and such. This gray thing here is our battery. Very, very useful. I know the probe core has a lot of battery in it, but I figured it was probably worthwhile to take this with us on this particular run. So what we're going to do is just relocate the cabin section facing the opposite direction and make the back the front and the front the back and the wheels that grip. And now those rear wheels articulate fully. So I guess they were maybe registering a possible impact with the cabin, which there's absolutely no way those wheels would have rubbed against this command seat, even at full articulation. But I don't like the seat placement. It's a little too high up. So seeing as how we can't mount it just to anything, but we can mount a tank radially, we're going to try to mount the cockpit onto the end of this tank. I know we're going to have to kind of redo this whole rover setup thing later when we go to move that life support tank back onto the ascent stage, but for now we can actually get decent placement on the cockpit controls, jump back in. We have much better weight balance now that all the weight sits in between the wheels and not out in front of it, and then return to our rovering goodness. A few more quick adjustments made to the friction control and the traction control settings, and we have a much more stable rover, he says, as it flips over yet again. There's just going to be a lot of this flipping going on, and I think what I have discovered is that if you leave the antennas retracted when it flips, all you have to do is extend them, and hopefully you'll end up right side up. Today was not that day, however. It helps to have both antennas on a single axis and not stabbing you through your spacesuit before you can right side up your vehicle and then get back on the road. And there's our first waypoint cleared, and now it is just a nice, I mean, it's not a straight trek, but it is a very treacherous drive over lots of dumb little hills, constantly making a very small jump and spinning a donut in the dust, which not really sure how that works, but now that this footage has been sped up a whole lot, those little spins look a whole lot less intrusive than they were actually playing this thing and having to just kind of sit here and babysit it, coming back to check on it just every 5 minutes or so. Made my day of filming much less interesting than it had any right to be. There's another couple of little donut spins. They get more frequent as we get into hillier areas here on Mars, but I'm sure the view was very, very nice, overlooking that scenic volcanoscape. We're trying to stay well clear of those super steep inclines, and so I'm kind of at a point of indecision. The easiest way into the volcano is going to be from this side, and I really don't want to repeat this drive. I really can't convey to you how absolutely arduous this kind of stuff is. I mean, this is literally about 3.5 hours of footage compressed down into about 20 minutes, and most of it was me just sitting here waiting for something to flip and explode, which is absolutely a thing that will happen at some point. No spoilers. It's not nearly as tragic as you think it might be. Thankfully, at least we had that going for us. But, you know, we look at the bright side here. Laura Douglas is absolutely setting rover records, especially for Mars. I don't think we've ever actually taken a crewed rover with a crew in it. There's the explosion. We hit a bump, flipped over, knocked off a headlight, and slid for a couple 100 meters, I would say, which is impressive considering the speed. I knew Mars was cold. I didn't know it was covered in very rust-colored ice. This cockpit actually has a torque wheel on it. Not strong enough to flip it over, however. Strong enough to drain the battery very quickly, but not enough to flip it upright. Oh man, I guess I haven't figured out the trick to flipping this rover over just yet. I will tell you that brake on pilot eject thing is a godsend, because I don't have to worry about setting the brake manually. We'll get some better antenna placement. We'll get it back onto its side and then move the antennas yet again to flip it all the way the hell over. It's a miracle this thing hasn't exploded. Not to invite the Kraken just yet, because we have to repeat this drive again. So, upright as it is, we're going to make sure her spacesuit is topped off with life support supplies, just in case we have something go absolutely tragically awry. And then we need to replot our course. Mekjev likes to reset things, and had her turned around heading back to the start point, which would have taken her across the volcano. Not a very good move. So we just deleted our old waypoints. We're probably going to have to replot our navigation on our way back to the Mars base. Not really a problem. I think maybe we'll go back around the other side. That could be useful, right? I mean, for absolutely no reason whatsoever. All of this is Mars Midlands until finally we go up the hill a little bit and get into Mars's Highlands, which I think we did have an uncrewed landing in at some point, based on some of the sciencey data bits that we will collect a little later. And once again, changes made to the traction control and the friction control settings. I think they're both at like 1.5 now, which is, we can't call it stable. Not by any stretch of the word is it considered stable. It is much better than it used to be. And this hill did have me a little worried that it was going to be a lot steeper than it looks, but we cleared it without too much issue. And then once we get into the home stretch of things, we'll secure in my new wheel settings, we'll switch to a much more cinematic camera to just kind of watch over the shoulder here as we set absolute insane records. Now, this little switchbacking is because we're on a hill. I locked the camera view, so you can't really tell, but we're inclined nearly 15 degrees to the side, and that was doing absolutely crazy hectic things as the rover tried to slide down the hill sideways and would steer to compensate for that. And there's another quick stop to take a quick save, and only one more hour of driving left to go. And turns out I plotted this very badly. It was a very long leg. Yeah, more side slipping because we're traveling along the side of a very large hill, and the rover doesn't like that a whole lot. We are just kind of fishtailing our way across Mars. You know, I mean, if you're going to set Martian rover records, you might as well drift it a little bit, because you probably will never get this opportunity again. You've already busted out a headlight, so, you know, go for broke or something. Anyway, as we start to clear some of this more mountainousy ranges of sorts, we will actually have to stop and replot once again, because I just kind of clicked in a big straight line. Didn't really take into consideration what we are going to have to go over. And as we get closer to our rover, oh yeah, another little phantom bounce upon quick saving. Yeah, good times. So we need to renavigate or replot some things without switching out to the map view, because it's harder to see the terrain, and I would really like to kind of avoid driving sideways on great steep hills and avoid some of these valleys. So we're going to take a much more, I guess, nuanced course, avoiding some valleys and trying to stay as close to flattened level as we possibly can. But there's a lot of these dumb hills in the way. But I think if we can guide our approach very carefully around some of these obstacles, we can actually get to where we're going and be very close to the lip of the crater of this fantastic volcano, and have a nice look inside, maybe get some science, maybe plant a nice flag. Because, you know, while we're here, we're totally not going to get this opportunity ever again. And I should really stop recording normal footage in the Twitch viewer mode in OBS that has these alerts pop up, although I'm very grateful. It's just silly to see in post-edit, that's all. And Laura Douglas, extremely ecstatic with her drive still. I mean, she's been crammed in this thing for nearly half a day now, or rather just several hours, I suppose. It really feels like half a day. It will be half a day, considering this is half of her trip. She has to go out there, and then she has to do some heavy lifting, and then she has to drive back. Although, I guess she could just camp for a night or so. We've got the life support supplies. I'm sure she brought a pillow, and maybe stole the only surviving Game Boy that made it through the crash. And there's a couple of waypoints down, a little wheelie here and there, never hurt anybody. And then finally, after like 4 or 5 more waypoints, we can actually start to make our final approach to our actual destination, our landed resupply pod, that little gold mine at the other end of the volcano. There's a last node, and we're within 10 kilometers now. And after this node, it should be closer to 4 or 5. Well, we'll get a solid sight line on it here coming up very soon, and hopefully I can give you a much more accurate measurement of our distance to target with our hull-mounted camera here that is completely ad hoc and totally didn't get choked with dust and sand and somehow survived a crash landing on Mars. 5 kilometers, the actual home stretch. You might as well get a nice cockpit view here for things that I can use to make cinematic clips later. Maybe even a little outro clip. I'm sure she's relaying back all of the fantastic experiences and the very desolate views that we have here. Not to mission control, because we don't have a satellite overhead to bounce a signal out of. So we can assume, though, that she is in contact with the surface base. I wonder if these omnidirectionals have an AM band that they can bounce around. Though I don't think Mars has the necessary requisite atmospheric content and magnetic shielding to make bouncing an AM frequency possible. Yeah, probably not. Now that I think about it, she's probably alone out here. Radio contact being completely blocked by the high end of that volcano. But we do have visual contact, however, with our dropped resupply pod. There it is. What a glorious sight, that intact engine. And I would have really hated having to resupply the base proper like this. This was a terrible idea. I mean, just a really bad idea. Anyway, I'm glad I figured it out now, instead of after dropping 9 or 10 of these dumb resupply pods all over Mars, only to figure out that this is the worst and most tedious way to keep your astronauts fed that has ever been devised by anyone ever. Now that I'm a little more familiar with the failures of MechJeb's landing guidance system, I think we might actually be able to do a little better as far as our targeted landings here on Mars. So we're just going to pull up right alongside this little guy here and take assessment on what it is that we're going to try to scavenge from this little thing. Definitely the engine and the engine mount plate. We're probably going to try to bring home that Able avionics core, provided the battery draw doesn't absolutely destroy our rover. And maybe one of these fuel tanks. Who knows? But we're here. Next episode, we'll probably be pulling this thing apart. I'll see about maybe sparing you the drive home. I really wish I could spare me the drive home. But, I guess that's what I signed up for. Maybe we'll get some science while we're here. I don't know. All the surprises await. Yeah, we're going to get some science while we're here. So, while we're going to run a few of these experiments, I'll just leave the results of that until next time. So, anyway, that's going to do it for this episode, everyone. Thank you so much for hanging out. I really do appreciate it, and I will see all of you in the next one. So, until then, see you later.